Welcome back to Podcast and Amplify. I am really excited to have our guest on this week. Her name is Rose Cox. She is the founder of the HSP Business School. She is also the host of the Sensitive CEO Show, and she's a business coach and a strategist. She's an advanced RT therapist and clinical hypnotherapist. And Rose works with highly sensitive people, empaths, and introverts to really help them share their amazing gifts with the world and to help them overcome those struggles that might come with being more on the sensitive side. So welcome to the show, Rose.
Thank you, Kristen. It's wonderful to be on your show. I love your show.
Thank you so much. Rose and I actually worked together a little bit at the very beginning of her podcast, and I think I was on your show in one of the earliest episodes, right?
Yes, you were. Yeah, you're one of my very first guests.
Yeah. And so I've been enjoying and continuing to listen to the show. She has fabulous guests. So definitely check out the podcast. But let's jump in and tell me about a pivotal moment that led you where you are today to really creating this business that helps HSP.
So I think it's 3 years ago now, I hosted my first online summit. I've done 3 now. But when I hosted the first one, it was 2 weeks, a 2-week summit. And in the second week, or the beginning of the second week, I suffered massive overwhelm and burnout. And I'd been following this quite strict program to put on this summit, and some of the methods didn't align with me. I'd already changed a few things that felt better, but it was just too much. And during that time, I managed to struggle over the finish line of the second week, but I really had to give it my all. And during that time, I was listening to a podcast. I'm an avid podcast listener. And I listened to an episode of one of the podcasts I listened to with a guest called Julie Beeland, who was talking all about HSP and the trait of high sensitivity. And I'd never heard of it before. And everything she said just felt, oh my God, that's me. That is so me. As I finished the summit, I dived into the topic of HSP, and it's also known as sensory processing sensitivity. I read a number of books by Elaine Aron. I did some courses, and I really dived into it and really got to know why I'd suffered this burnout and why I'd always felt different from other people in business and not being able to follow certain strategies that quite popular or successful coaches were teaching other people. So that was a huge pivotal moment. I went on to host 2 more summits, and they were both for HSPs only, not only, but they were for highly sensitive people. They were both called the HSP Entrepreneur Summit, and it just opened up a world to the various speakers that I met through the journey of hosting. But it also made me realize there's so many people out there like me who had no idea about this trait and how they could actually use it to their advantage and discover the superpowers behind the trait rather than really suffer, which a lot of HSPs do because they feel so different from non-HSPs.
Yeah, and I think we live in a world that doesn't necessarily value or lift up that sensitive side of us. We live in a really loud world.
And I think because 80% of the population are non-HSP, there's 20% of us, which is still over 1 billion, I think. It's quite a lot. But most things, most programs, most environments, most things are set up for non-HSPs. And yeah, we are in the minority.
What you said around doing the summit and doing just the activities in your business with a program that is very go and push yourself. And I was definitely relating to that because I know, like, for launches, like I don't do launches really anymore because they're too much. And I don't function that way, but it took me a while to give them up because there's so much pressure to do things a certain way in business.
Yeah.
Um, can you define HSP for us? And like, how would we know if we are one of the 20%?
Yeah, so when I discovered it, when I heard about it, I went straight to Elaine Aaron's website, which is hspperson.com, and she's got a free quiz on there. And I think I got one question wrong. Not wrong, but I was like right up there at the top. So that's one place I'd recommend if you feel that you might sit in this category, then I'd definitely go there. But there's also things like if you feel affected by the environment, things like bright lights, and this is something I've always really struggled with, is lighting at nighttime, even car lights, if they're too bright coming towards me. It's all the different senses. So smells, if you find yourself getting really overwhelmed by really strong smells, but at the same time, really appreciating beautiful smells and appreciating the beautiful things. So for every area, there's a positive side, if that makes sense. And taking on board other people's emotions is a huge thing. So the empathy and being affected. If you walk into a room, you know if someone is angry or happy, or we so easily pick up other people's emotions. And something Julie Beelan shares also is, if you think about a non-HSP, there's 3 lines of information that goes into their brain. For HSPs, there's over 50 lines of this information. So there's a lot coming in, there's a lot that we need to process. So if any of that resonates, I definitely recommend going to that website, doing that quiz, and there's so many fantastic resources that share our superpowers and our wonderful traits and how we can use them. And I'm happy to share some on this call as well.
I definitely can relate to picking up on people's emotions when you walk into the room. It's just an automatic sensing, oh, what's going on there? What's going on there? And I think it took me a while to realize not everyone else does that. So I was like, oh, okay, this is a interesting trait. It's useful for sure. Like you said, everything has a beneficial side and maybe a little bit of a shadow side to it. Am I correct in saying that there's like a spectrum, that it's like introversion, being an introvert, where there's a spectrum that you fall on?
Not really. I think you're either highly sensitive or you're not.
Okay.
Although some areas, I think there's some areas that you're more sensitive to others. There are extroverted HSPs. I think it's around 30% of the population of HSPs are extrovert, but 70% introvert. And with all the people I've met over the last few years, they do tend to be more introverted. And funnily enough, a lot of INFJs in the Myers-Briggs. Are you INFJ?
Yeah, I think I'm INF. I can't remember the last one.
J or P's common as well.
So interesting. So then how does that all play into being a business owner? You touched on it a little bit, how it affected you and your business. And I mentioned my experience in terms of launching or just showing up on social media even. But how can we tap into those strengths? And then maybe how can we, when we come up with face those challenges that HSPs inevitably will come up against? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so what I ended up doing with the second and third summit, I developed it in the way that I wanted to do it, that I knew would work for me. So they were 5 days rather than 2 weeks, which was a lot easier on my nervous system. And I've carried that throughout my whole business in the last few years, since I realized that the strategies that are so often out there aren't suited to us. So I've developed frameworks, and I've worked with HSP coaches to help with the frameworks as well. So I really recommend to make it your own. So use a framework, but make it your own. Something else with the first summit was that it led straight into a masterclass, a launch, another big launch straight after a 2-week summit. And I just,
Wow.
no way. I
2 weeks is
couldn't do
a
it.
long summit.
I know. And then I think it was supposed to be 3 or 5 days after was a launch, like a masterclass. And I said, I
Wow.
can't do that.
I would have been under the covers in the fetal position.
Yeah, I pretty much was. I had really bad burnout. It took me about a month to recover from that. It's so interesting that I did another 2 summits after that, but I felt so passionate about helping others, and I knew if I could get speakers who were really experts. I had Julie Beeland, who was someone who I really look up to, and I've followed her for a while since I found out. And I met the most amazing people, and I thought, if I can share this with my audience so that they can really understand themselves, then yeah, that was my passion. And actually, that's another business strategy that I know it's talked about a lot, but something I really recommend is getting really clear on your vision and your passion, because so much of that is going to drive everything in your business, and it's going to help you to feel aligned. So you're doing something that you want to do, not something that someone has told you to do or that you think you should do. It's something that you really want to do. And then that drives everything in your business. And that's something I teach in the business school, because I think it's such a key thing. I think it's the foundation. I think other strategies are to set clear boundaries. I only see clients on certain days. I only record podcasts on certain days. I have big buffers in between my calls. I take a lot of downtime in between clients and calls like this. I'll go out, and I just went and stood on the grass, barefoot on the grass. And I always giggle to myself because I always have to check for snakes and not big ones, but little grass snakes, which are pretty harmless. But I always have a little giggle if the lawn's too long. So there's things like that. And I always have essential oils burning in my office. So having the boundaries, but also setting up your environment where you feel really comfortable.
It sounds like it's being connected to what's really important to you, which I think that sensitive people can really do because they are really in tune with themselves. And I think that is so important.